On the afternoon of January 31, a distressing call was received by emergency services. The caller, a man whose identity has been kept confidential for his protection, reported finding 2 abandoned suitcases. Fearing for his safety, he made no attempt to move or open them. Law enforcement responded promptly. Police officers, accompanied by bomb squad personnel and forensic specialists, quickly secured the area. Treating the situation with extreme caution, they conducted a thorough inspection of the suitcases. After confirming that there was no danger of explosives, the investigators proceeded to open them. What they found inside was deeply horrifying. Although the contents could not be immediately identified, investigators contacted the family of Pamela. Her parents, Alessandra and Stefano, were asked to come to assist with a preliminary identification. In what would become one of the most devastating moments of their lives, they confirmed their worst fear. It was Pamela Mastropietro. Dear viewers, thank you for choosing our video and our channel. We put a lot of effort into making sure you enjoy being with us. In this documentary, we investigate a true crime case involving Pamela Mastropietro. She was born on August 23, 1999, in the historic and vibrant city of Rome, Italy. She was the only daughter of Alessandra Berni and Stefano Mastropietro, both of whom came from respected families and were considered pillars of their local business community. Her parents, highly educated and ambitious, had worked hard to build a stable and prosperous life. They owned a flourishing enterprise that afforded them a comfortable lifestyle, and they made sure that Pamela never wanted for material things. She lived in a well-furnished home, wore designer clothes, and had access to excellent schools and private tutors. But even the most luxurious surroundings can sometimes conceal the invisible weight of emotional absence. Despite their love for her, the realities of Alessandra and Stefano's professional obligations meant they were often absent from home, preoccupied with their ever-demanding schedules. Family meals were infrequent, and meaningful conversations even rarer. While they strived to make up for lost time during holidays and vacations, Pamela often felt the emotional void left by their absence, though she couldn't always articulate it as a child. From an early age, Pamela exhibited certain idiosyncrasies that hinted at deeper emotional complexities. She was notably introverted, avoiding eye contact and preferring solitude over playdates or group activities. While some parents might have seen these as early warning signs, Alessandra and Stefano were hopeful, perhaps even optimistic, that their daughter's shyness would diminish with age and exposure to social environments. They encouraged her to join extracurricular activities, from ballet classes to piano lessons, hoping these would spark a change. But the underlying disquiet remained, subtly deepening as the years progressed. As Pamela entered her primary school years, her emotional struggles became more apparent. Teachers noted her academic potential. She had a sharp memory and an eye for detail, but she was noticeably withdrawn. She rarely raised her hand in class, and group assignments often left her feeling overwhelmed. Socially, she remained on the margins, often seen sitting alone during recess, staring off into the distance, or writing in a small notebook she carried everywhere. Her teachers expressed concern during parent-teacher meetings, and soon the conversation shifted from academics to emotional well-being. By the time she reached adolescence, the psychological toll was unmistakable. Pamela began experiencing severe bouts of anxiety, often leading to panic attacks at night. Sleep became elusive, and her once orderly routine unraveled. She developed irrational fears of abandonment, of being watched, of failing in ways that were not even clearly defined. After multiple consultations with mental health professionals, she was eventually diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, a complex condition characterized by intense emotional instability, difficulty forming stable relationships, and a fragmented sense of self. As Pamela grew older, these challenges intensified. Her relationships, even casual ones, were often marked by emotional turbulence. She oscillated between deep attachment and complete detachment, unable to consistently trust others or evaluate social situations with clarity. While many teenagers experiment and push boundaries, Pamela's inability to gauge risks made her especially susceptible to manipulation by individuals with exploitative intentions. At the age of 11, another destabilizing event shook the foundations of her already fragile world. Her parents' marriage began to unravel. Alessandra and Stefano's relationship, once a partnership of equals, devolved into frequent arguments and extended periods of silence. Though they tried to shield Pamela from the worst of it, children often internalize more than adults realize. The home that once served as her sanctuary became a place of emotional confusion. The stress culminated in Pamela being diagnosed with clinical depression, adding yet another layer to her psychological burden. Although her parents eventually reconciled and committed to therapy to restore their marriage, the damage to Pamela's emotional landscape had already been done. She continued to battle low self-worth and a lingering sense of hopelessness. By the time she turned 13, doctors also diagnosed her with bipolar disorder, an illness that introduced alternating episodes of elevated mood and deep despair. Despite being placed on medication and undergoing regular psychiatric evaluations, the path ahead remained steep and uneven. In her teenage years, Pamela began to change physically. She blossomed into a striking young woman with a statuesque figure and expressive features that often drew compliments from strangers and admiration from her peers. However, this attention did not bolster her self-esteem. Instead, it added a new layer of anxiety. Pamela lacked the tools to process this attention in a healthy way and began relying on external validation to fill her inner void. Her emotional vulnerability led her to experiment with alcohol. What began as casual use during parties or small gatherings quickly became a coping mechanism. Her judgment, already compromised by her mental health challenges, further deteriorated. Her psychiatrist would later testify that Pamela's psychological profile made it difficult for her to fully comprehend the risks associated with her choices. She often lacked the capacity to give informed consent, a vulnerability that left her exposed. At just 16 years old, her reliance on alcohol had escalated to the point where her parents made the heart-wrenching decision to enroll her in a private rehabilitation facility. It was a last resort, a desperate attempt to shield her from further harm and to offer her a structured environment where she could heal. Initially, the treatment seemed promising. Pamela responded well to therapy and even began to reconnect with her studies. For a time, it seemed as though she was turning a corner. She returned home after several months in treatment, resumed school, and for over a year, managed to stay on track. Her progress brought a glimmer of hope to her family. But stability can be fleeting for those navigating severe mental health conditions. At 18, she met Claudiu, a 20-year-old man originally from Romania, whose charm and attention quickly won her over. He appeared to be caring, supportive even, but beneath the surface, his intentions were far from benign. Their relationship progressed rapidly. Claudiu became a central figure in Pamela's life, isolating her from her family and undermining her fragile recovery. Her erratic behavior returned. She skipped classes, disappeared for days, and began lying to those closest to her. Eventually, she stopped attending school altogether and ran away from home multiple times. Her parents were devastated. Desperate to find her and bring her home safely, they turned to law enforcement. Thanks to their efforts, Claudia was located and taken into custody. The subsequent investigation revealed disturbing details about his influence over Pamela. He had coerced her into engaging in illegal activities to sustain their habits, exploiting her psychological fragility for his own gain. In court, Claudiu was sentenced to 4 years in prison. For Pamela's parents, the conviction brought some measure of justice, but it did little to ease their fears for their daughter's future. By mid-October of 2017, Alessandra and Stefano once again faced a painful decision. Recognizing the severity of Pamela's condition and the risks she continued to face, they arranged for her to be admitted to another specialized rehabilitation clinic. This time, they hoped the facility would offer a more intensive and tailored approach, one that could help her rebuild not just her health, but her sense of self-worth and independence. They remained hopeful, clinging to the belief that with the right care, their daughter might still find a path to stability. This time, in a renewed act of faith and desperation, Pamela's parents made a decision they believed might finally offer their daughter the peace and protection she so desperately needed. Determined to remove her from all familiar influences that had contributed to her relapse, Alessandra and Stefano selected a rehabilitation facility far from the distractions and dangers of city life. They hoped that physical distance from Rome and from the people and environments that had negatively impacted Pamela might lead to emotional clarity and genuine recovery. The center they chose was located in Matara, a quiet provincial town nestled in the countryside. The facility had a reputation for providing high-level psychological treatment and support, promising comprehensive, round-the-clock care tailored to the individual. It was not an inexpensive option. In fact, it was among the costliest in the country. Yet for Alessandra and Stefano, cost was not a concern. They were willing to exhaust their savings, delay business ventures, anything to give Pamela a fighting chance at reclaiming her life. They had already watched her suffer for years, oscillating between hope and despair, and they couldn't bear to let her fall again. The program itself was structured to last 3 months, and the treatment plan was multifaceted. Pamela was enrolled in a rigorous routine that included one-on-one psychotherapy, group therapy sessions, and medical supervision by a team of professionals. The therapeutic strategy was designed to not only address substance dependency, but also her underlying psychiatric diagnoses: borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder, and clinical depression. The center emphasized a holistic model, incorporating art therapy, yoga, and mindfulness training. From the outside, it appeared to be a haven of healing. Alessandra and Stefano, while cautious, allowed themselves to feel hope again. They expected the facility's high fees to reflect a higher standard of accountability, supervised outings, limited contact with the outside world, and, above all, strict oversight to prevent any chance of relapse. But behind the professional brochures and polished testimonials, the reality was starkly different. As time passed, Pamela seemed to show initial signs of progress. In her weekly phone calls with her parents, her voice appeared more animated, more optimistic. She even mentioned that the shared experiences of others in recovery made her feel less alone, less judged. For the first time in months, she said she could see a future for herself. Her therapists noted an improvement in her willingness to participate in group work and her ability to engage emotionally, albeit cautiously. However, beneath this surface progress, dangerous cracks had begun to form. The clinic, though marketed as secure and intensively managed, turned out to be lax in enforcement of its own rules. Curfews were poorly monitored. Patients were often permitted to leave the grounds without proper checks. Staff members were stretched thin and sometimes inattentive, allowing vulnerable residents, many of whom, like Pamela, required close supervision, to fall through the cracks. By early January 2018, Pamela's behavior began to change again. She grew more withdrawn, less communicative. Fellow patients later reported that she had begun sneaking out in the evenings, sometimes returning hours later without explanation. She avoided group activities and skipped therapy sessions. Her dependency, the very condition her stay was intended to treat, had begun resurfacing with increased intensity. Alarmingly, her primary physician did not report or act upon these red flags, failing to revise her care plan or inform her family of her regression. On the morning of January 29th, the illusion of progress collapsed. Pamela was no longer on the clinic grounds. A staff member made a call to Alessandra and Stefano, informing them with unsettling calmness that their daughter was missing and that she had apparently walked out. The initial explanation suggested a spontaneous escape, a sudden flight without warning. But further scrutiny of the facts painted a much more deliberate and concerning picture. A review of security camera footage from the facility showed Pamela methodically packing her belongings into a small suitcase. She was calm, composed. There was no sign of panic or urgency. She walked through the clinic's front door in broad daylight, completely unchallenged. No staff member stopped to ask her where she was going. No one followed her. No alert was issued until hours later. It was as though she had simply checked out of a hotel rather than departed from a secure psychiatric treatment center. Interviews with other residents and staff revealed that Pamela had spoken openly, though quietly, about her growing disillusionment with the program. She told some that she planned to leave and return to Rome, convinced that the treatment she was receiving had failed to address her needs. It was clear, in retrospect, that this departure was premeditated, not impulsive. But Pamela never arrived in Rome. She never contacted her family. She didn't appear at any local station or boarding platform. Her phone remained off. It was as though she had vanished. Panicked, Alessandra and Stefano filed a missing persons report with local law enforcement. They appeared on a regional news broadcast, pleading for help and offering a monetary reward for any credible leads. Flyers were distributed across Matara and surrounding towns. The story quickly gained attention, but for 48 hours, there were no substantial developments. Then, on the afternoon of January 31, a startling call was made to emergency services by a local resident living just a few miles from the rehabilitation center. The man, whose identity was kept private for safety reasons, reported the presence of 2 unattended suitcases discarded in a shallow ditch near his property. The bags had been left in an odd manner and had a strong chemical odor. Concerned for his safety, he did not attempt to touch or open them. Police arrived swiftly, accompanied by bomb disposal experts and forensic technicians. The area was sealed off and examined with utmost caution. After determining there was no explosive threat, the investigators carefully opened the suitcases. What they discovered inside left them profoundly disturbed. Though specific details were not publicly disclosed in full to protect the dignity of the victim and her family, it was immediately evident that the discovery was connected to the ongoing search for Pamela Mastropietro. The contents were handled with precision by forensic teams, who noted the presence of a corrosive bleach-like chemical, likely used to eliminate biological evidence. This indicated an intentional effort to hinder identification and obstruct the investigation. Though identification could not be made on the spot, investigators notified Pamela's parents and requested their presence for assistance in the preliminary recognition process. In one of the most heart-wrenching moments of their lives, Alessandra and Stefano confirmed what they had feared the most. It was their daughter. Despite the attempt to destroy forensic evidence, the authorities pressed forward. They began retracing Pamela's steps from the clinic to her last known location. Surveillance footage from a nearby public square showed Pamela walking slowly, dressed in dark clothing, dragging her suitcase behind her. She appeared to be scanning her surroundings, possibly looking for transportation or someone specific. Footage showed her approaching a public transit stop, where she lingered for several minutes, at times raising her hand toward passing vehicles. Roughly 15 minutes after Pamela was last seen on surveillance footage near a public transit stop, a taxi pulled up alongside the curb. The footage, though slightly grainy due to the low evening light, clearly showed a young woman, visibly tired, dragging a compact suitcase, exchanging words with the driver. After a brief exchange, she climbed into the back seat. The timestamp on the footage marked it as one of her final confirmed sightings before the investigation would spiral into a labyrinth of leads, dead ends, and unsettling truths. Unfortunately, once the taxi turned the corner and left the range of the municipal surveillance system, the digital trail went dark. There were no other cameras positioned to capture the route they took or where Pamela was ultimately dropped off. With limited data to go on, investigators quickly turned their attention to identifying the vehicle. Using frame-by-frame analysis, traffic records, and license plate tracking, they successfully located the registered owner of the taxi and contacted the driver within hours. When investigators visited the driver's home and showed him a photo of Pamela, he immediately confirmed that he remembered her. His recollection was clear and detailed, and his cooperation with authorities was prompt. The driver explained that Pamela had approached him calmly, asking to be driven to the train station, stating that she intended to travel to Rome. However, by the time she arrived at the station, the final train of the day had already departed. According to his testimony, Pamela expressed her intention to wait overnight at the terminal until the next scheduled train in the morning. Concerned for her well-being, the driver told authorities that he offered her an alternative. He suggested that she rest at his nearby residence, where she could be safe and comfortable, rather than spending the night alone in a public space. To his surprise, Pamela accepted the offer without hesitation or inquiry. He recalled that she seemed tired, emotionally distant, and unusually trusting of someone she had only just met. The following morning, Pamela reportedly expressed discomfort, saying she felt physically unwell. The driver, noticing signs that resembled withdrawal symptoms, asked if she needed medical help, but Pamela declined. Instead, she requested to be dropped off at a small public park in the area, insisting that she needed some fresh air and time alone. The driver, while uneasy, respected her request. He dropped her off and watched her walk toward a bench beneath a cluster of trees before driving away. He claimed that this was the last time he saw her. Authorities verified the man's timeline through GPS records from the taxi's onboard system and corroborated his location data. While Pamela's parents were later critical of his decision to bring their vulnerable daughter to his home, a decision they believed reflected poor judgment, the court ultimately found no legal grounds to charge him with wrongdoing. The judge ruled that while his actions were questionable from a moral standpoint, there was no evidence of coercion, exploitation, or intent to cause harm. Pamela's mental health condition, while serious, did not legally render her incapable of consenting to non-criminal situations, such as accepting a ride or overnight shelter. The driver was formally cleared of any involvement in her disappearance. But the trail picked up again at the public park. There, Pamela encountered a man known locally by the name of Desmond. He was already familiar to authorities due to his involvement in various minor infractions, and was loosely connected to a broader network under informal investigation. Desmond, who had been under quiet surveillance for suspected low-level street dealing, was located and brought in for questioning soon after his name surfaced in connection with Pamela's last known movements. During a lengthy interview with detectives, Desmond acknowledged interacting with Pamela. He admitted that he had made a deal, exchanging a small amount for a necklace that Pamela was wearing. He insisted, however, that their exchange was brief and that he did not accompany her afterward. He described her as quiet and visibly distressed, but insisted she walked away on her own and that he had no further contact with her. Investigators, while not entirely convinced of his limited role, had no immediate evidence to contradict his version of events. Desmond was held in custody based on unrelated charges, including possession and distribution of substances and immigration-related concerns. Authorities considered him a person of interest, especially regarding a potential cover-up, but not the central suspect in Pamela's disappearance. The investigation took another turn when surveillance footage surfaced, showing Pamela entering a nearby pharmacy shortly after her interaction with Desmond. While her presence there was not inherently suspicious, what caught investigators' attention was another figure captured on camera entering and exiting the pharmacy around the same time. The man kept a subtle distance but seemed to be observing Pamela. His movements were cautious, deliberate. He exited the store just moments after she did, walking in the same direction. Using facial recognition and assistance from immigration authorities, police were able to identify the man as Innocent Osul, a 30-year-old Nigerian national who was living in Italy without formal documentation. His name had surfaced in connection with previous low-level criminal activity, though he had never been arrested for any violent offense. He lived in a low-income neighborhood just a few blocks from the park where Pamela was last seen. Investigators turned to Desmond once again and offered him a deal, a reduced sentence in exchange for cooperation. Under pressure, Desmond provided Innocent's address and additional context that placed both men in the vicinity of Pamela on the day she disappeared. A warrant was swiftly obtained. When police arrived at Innocent's apartment, the unit was empty, but officers were authorized to search the premises. What they found inside would dramatically alter the course of the investigation. In the small, dimly lit apartment, investigators discovered a series of items that raised immediate alarm. Stains consistent with biological material were found on the bathroom floor and walls, hastily cleaned but still visible under forensic lighting. Several items of women's clothing were found bundled in a laundry bin. Among them were garments matching the description of what Pamela had been wearing the day she left the clinic. When shown photographs of the items, Alessandra and Stefano, through visible anguish, identified them as their daughters. Further inspection of the bathroom revealed 4 empty bottles of chlorine bleach, all discarded under the sink. Investigators surmised that an attempt had been made to sanitize the space, but the cleaning had been insufficient to remove all evidence. Swabs were collected for DNA analysis, Surveillance footage from a commercial street just outside the apartment complex provided yet another piece of the puzzle. The video, time-stamped late at night on the same day Pamela went missing, showed Innocent carrying a large suitcase with visible difficulty. He was accompanied by two unidentified men, and together, they were seen loading the suitcase into a vehicle. That vehicle was later tracked to the same suburban ditch where two suitcases were discovered and reported by a concerned local resident. This new footage suggested that Innocent may not have acted alone. The presence of two other individuals pointed to the possibility of a coordinated effort, not only to transport evidence but to obscure what had occurred. At this point, the case was no longer just a missing persons investigation. It had evolved into a complex, multi-suspect criminal inquiry involving forensic evidence, witness accounts, and digital surveillance. The investigation into Pamela Mastropietro's disappearance and death took a crucial turn when the vehicle used to transport. Law enforcement officers followed a paper trail through traffic camera data, informal networks, and vehicle registration logs. Eventually, the car was linked not to Innocent Osel directly, but to a known associate of Desmond, a man named Lucky Alo. Lucky, who had previously maintained a low profile and had not been considered a central suspect, was arrested the same day his name surfaced. During the interrogation, it was established that Lucky was driving the car. He admitted to driving that night, with Innocent and Desmond both present in the car. Initially, Desmond tried to distance himself entirely, denying any knowledge. However, as more evidence was presented, including surveillance, digital data, and location tracking, his position became untenable. Faced with mounting pressure, both Lucky and Innocent gave statements to the police. They claimed they were merely helping to remove some things at Innocent's request, and that they had no idea what the suitcases contained. However, the police noted multiple inconsistencies in their accounts, and their lack of urgency in reporting the act raised serious suspicions. Innocent Osel was formally arrested on February 2, 2018. From the moment of his arrest, he denied any involvement in Pamela's death. Instead, he offered a strange and contradictory narrative that changed repeatedly during questioning. He initially told detectives that he had met Pamela at the park by chance. According to him, they began a casual conversation, and after a brief interaction, he invited her to his apartment. To the investigators' disbelief, Innocent said that Pamela willingly agreed to accompany him. What followed, according to his own words, was a scenario that raised red flags across the board. Innocent claimed that shortly after arriving at his apartment, Pamela suddenly lost consciousness. He stated that she collapsed unexpectedly, and when he attempted to revive her, he was unable to find any sign of life. He said he panicked, unsure of what to do. Fearful that no one would believe his version of events, especially given his undocumented status and criminal record. He admitted to using chemical agents in an attempt to eliminate DNA evidence in the apartment. Investigators took note of the vagueness of this claim, especially since bleach and similar agents had already been found at the scene. As for the role of Lucky and Desmond, Innocent's explanation evolved again. Upon waking, he alleged that Desmond and Lucky were already in the apartment, and it was they who suggested disposing of the suitcases. He attempted to present himself as a passive participant who was overwhelmed and misled by his acquaintances. Yet, forensic investigators were already uncovering details that told a far more deliberate story. Among the most significant findings were traces of Innocent's DNA under Pamela's fingernails. This critical evidence directly contradicted Innocent's claim that Pamela had simply collapsed. Both Desmond and Lucky continued to deny having entered Innocent's apartment at any point during the alleged incident. They insisted their only involvement came afterward, when they were asked for transportation assistance. They emphasized their connections to unrelated illegal activities as a way of explaining their presence in the area that night. Their alibis were partly corroborated by external sources, though key gaps in their stories persisted. Even so, the lack of direct evidence linking them to the scene at the time of death limited the prosecution's ability to charge them as full accomplices. While the three men remained in custody, a dedicated forensic task force worked tirelessly and reconstruct the timeline of her final hours. Progress was slow and methodical. For more than 6 months, the case hovered in limbo. The prosecution knew that although Innocent was the primary suspect, a conviction would require airtight evidence, particularly since much of the forensic material had been contaminated or compromised by the chemical cleaning efforts. Eventually, investigators decided to pursue a more strategic approach. Believing Innocent might confide in someone he trusted, they arranged for an undercover informant to be placed in his prison cell. The individual, posing as a fellow detainee, gradually built a rapport with Innocent over weeks. They shared meals, engaged in casual conversation, and discussed their respective charges. Over time, Innocent's guarded demeanor began to fade. Feeling increasingly comfortable, he eventually opened up. In a series of unguarded conversations, he confessed to his role in Pamela's death. The informant, who was equipped with a concealed recording device approved by legal authorities, captured the admissions in full. Innocent did not describe every detail, but clearly stated that he had panicked when Pamela lost consciousness and chose to cover it up, fearing arrest and deportation. The recording became a cornerstone of the prosecution's case. When court proceedings began, the informant was brought forward as a key witness, providing not only testimony but also audio evidence. This bombshell was followed by another unexpected development. Lucky Alo came forward voluntarily, revealing that Innocent had contacted him directly during the night of the incident, asking for immediate help. This testimony aligned closely with the evidence and with Innocent's own recorded confession. Prosecutors now had a compelling narrative backed by DNA, digital tracking, witness statements, and the defendant's own words. The trial of Innocent Osel, Desmond, and Lucky Ilo commenced in the spring of 2019, attracting widespread media attention. The courtroom was filled with journalists, legal observers, and grieving supporters of Pamela's family. For Alessandra and Stefano, it marked the culmination of a painful journey through bureaucratic delays, emotional trauma, and public scrutiny. By May 2019, the verdict was delivered. Innocent Osel was found guilty on multiple counts, including committing non-consensual acts, unlawful confinement, and attempting to obstruct justice by destroying evidence. The court ruled that the evidence against him was overwhelming and consistent, and that his shifting accounts only further demonstrated his culpability. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a sentence upheld through multiple appeals. As for Desmond and Lucky, although the court did not find enough evidence to prove they had actively participated in the central crime, it did determine that they were aware of the gravity of the situation and had chosen not to report it. They were both convicted, and the court acknowledged that their silence and cooperation in disposing of evidence, even without full knowledge, contributed to delaying justice. Both men received 5-year prison sentences,